Hello, my friends, and welcome to Crimes and Curiosities, the show where we deep dive into true crime, conspiracy theories, history's strangest facts, and the internet's weirdest deep dives. I'm your host, Charity, and it is ridiculously early when I am recording this. It's nobody's fault but my own and my computer's. I will blame the computer. Last week was Thanksgiving. My computer crashed, which is not fun. I'm currently having to do some weird janky setup between my computer and my husband's computer, but we're making it work, and we're here, and we are super, super excited to go over this next episode. And I am actually incredibly excited for this next episode because it is my Roman Empire. I think about this specific case probably more than anybody should at least once a week for years, because this case is so incredibly weird and deep, and there are no answers. Like, we are to the point now where the possibility of ever knowing exactly what happened in this case are slim to none. And I can accept that. But at the same time, I know that when my day comes and I enter the kingdom of heaven, the very first question that I probably will ask God is, what happened? Because I need to know. I need to know. And so we're going to be discussing this today in depth. I cannot go over every single theory of what may have actually happened because we'd be here for hours. But I'm going to go over the hot spots, the timeline, and my thoughts, as well as others. So for today's episode, let's get into it. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. I want to start by saying these names are very Russian. The Dyatlov Pass incident happened in Russia. I am very Texan. I will be doing my best to pronounce these names, but a girl can only do so much with the accent God gave her. I'm doing my best. I will do my best. Please correct me in the comments if I am mispronouncing anything. I will apologize profusely. But let's start. In January of 1959, a group of 9 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Russia started off on a journey to the Ural Mountains, where they were planning on going on a Category 3 level trek through the mountains. Now, each of these individuals were very experienced hikers. They were skilled in long ski tours as well as mountainous expeditions. A Category 3 trek for them did not seem impossible. And what this means is basically at that time of year during that season, this was the most difficult trek that a mountain hiker could go on. Now, this group of 9 students was led by a man named Igor Dyatlov, who was 23 at the time. But in addition to him, there was also a sports instructor from their sports club who would attend the trip with them that was much older than everybody else on the trip. So most of these students are going to be in their early 20s, and the sports instructor will be in his later 30s. And because there are so many of them, I am going to go ahead and read off their names. Also, just for the fact that this is their story. These are their lives that were cut short, and I want you to know their names and their ages at the time of this trek. Igor Dyatlov was 23. Yuri Doroshenko was 21. Lyudmila Dubanina was 20. Alexander Kolovatov was 24. Zenaida Kolmogorova was 22. Yuri Krivonishenko was 23. Rustem Slobodin was also 23. Nikolay Thibault Brignoux was 23. And Yuri Yudin was 21. And those are the list of the students. And the sports instructor was Semyon Zolotaryov, who was 37. Now with him, one of the heartbreaking things to note of the story was he was 37 when the expedition started. But depending on how long they lasted, he may have turned 38. The question is if they passed on the February 1st or February 2nd, because Semyon's birthday was on February 2nd when he would have turned 38. So leading up to the trek, the group took off on January 25th on a train to Ivdel, and then they took a trek to Vizhay. And Vizhay is a very small town, basically as far north as you can go before you hit the Ural Mountains. And then on January 27th, they started their actual trek from Vizhay to a town called Ortortin. Now, there is one thing to know, which is that Yuri Yudin, one of the students on the trek, did actually turn back around 1 to 2 days into the trek. There is some sort of confusion as to how many days. Some of my sources said 1 day. Some sources said 5. Nobody seems to be very consistent, but they do all say that Yudin turned back due to sciatic pain. And while he may have been in pain at that moment, the pain probably actually saved his life, because what would happen between 5 to 6 days into the trek would be disastrous. The trek itself was meant to last 14 days, with Dyatlov stating that he would send a telegram back to the sports club once they made it to Ortortin. And he actually believed that it would take about 12 days when he left, but when Yudin returned, he stated that Dyatlov believed it may actually take a little bit longer due to the severe conditions that they were facing on the track. However, by February 20th, still no communication from the group had been received. And by this point, some of the family members of the students actually began to demand action from the institute, demanding that they start to send out a search team. And this was specifically pushed by Kolevatov's eldest sister, Rima. And even about a week after this, his other sister, Nina, would write a telegram that would be read at the Kremlin that would be pushing for an escalated search and rescue operation. So by February 20th, the institute itself is sending out some student and teacher volunteers to help search. But by February 27th, we're seeing more police, army, and aircraft rescue operations beginning to take place. Now, an additional piece to this is that the beginning of the search was slightly hindered due to the fact that Dyatlov had not submitted all of his paperwork for the trek, specifically the one that stated the route that they would be taking. So here's a hint for you. If you ever go on a major hike, especially one that could take days or weeks, let people know where you're going. I don't care how many people are with you. As we're seeing from this incident, strange things can happen to large numbers. And a route helps people to find you. Luckily, a friend of Kolevatov, I believe his name is pronounced Reagan. If I am pronouncing that poorly, I am so sorry. But he had discussed the trek with him earlier in January. And then he was able to recall most of that route from memory to Kolevatov's sister, Rima. And from there, she was able to send that over to some of the UPI military department, who was able to then use that for additional information to help the search. Now, 6 days after the search and rescue operation began, on February 26th, one of the student volunteers named Mikhail Sharavin found the tent that the group had been using. And he stated the tent was half torn down and covered with snow. It was empty, and all of the group's belongings and shoes had been left behind. There was even a half-prepared plate of food still sitting inside the tent. So from the outside, it looked like a completely crazy scene. You have this tent that has been pushed over. It's now covered in snow. It's sliced in half from where they had cut themselves out. But on the inside, you see a completely serene scene that shows no sign of chaos. And we do know that they actually cut themselves out of the tent because examiners would find that the cut in the tent was made from the inside. Now, luckily, because most of their items were still inside the tent, we do actually have multiple cameras from those on the trek, and they were able to take the photos from those cameras to set up a timeline for how long they may have still been on their route before whatever this tragedy was happened. So we see a timeline of day 1, day 2, day 3, and it's believed that their final camp date would have been around February 1st or February 2nd, but it's believed to have been February 1st of 1959. Now, on the same day, the first 2 bodies of the 9 were found. And I say 9 because Uden did return after the first day or so on the trek. So there's only 9 left, 8 students and the sports instructor. But the first 2 that were found were Doroshenko and Krivonishenko. Now, the 2 of them were found near the tree line underneath a very large tree. What's interesting is that they were found only in their underwear. The tree branches going up about 5 meters appear to have been broken as if they had attempted to climb it, either for warmth or for a lookout to possibly see rescue. The 2 were also laid next to the remnants of what was a fire, and Krivonishenko was even found to have burns on his body and a piece of his own knuckle inside his mouth. So what it appears to be is that he had bit down so hard on his hand that he bit a piece off and died with it in his mouth, which is so heartbreaking because you can just imagine how cold he must have been for this to have happened. Now, additionally to this, another very odd moment in this case is that the examiners would find that the livor mortis had set in on both of the men's bodies on their backs, meaning that their backs would have been exposed when they died. However, Krivonishenko was found on his back, meaning that despite his back having been exposed when he died for some time, somebody must have turned him over after the fact, which means that he was moved after he died. So the question is, who or why? Now, one day after this, Dyatlov and Kolmogorova were found in a manner that appears as if they were attempting to return to the tent. They also appeared to be in some sort of a state of undress, but no physical signs of assault or injury were shown on their bodies. And then around a week after this, on March 5th, Slobodin was also found in a manner that appears as if he was attempting to return to the tent. Now, Slobodin did have a skull fracture, but it does appear to have been non-fatal, which means that it was not the reason that he died. In fact, the exact cause of death for all 5 of those found within that first few weeks of the search was hypothermia, specifically leading to paradoxical undressing. And if you don't know what that is, it basically means that you are so cold, your brain tricks itself into thinking that it's actually hot, but it tricks itself into thinking that it's too hot. So then you start to undress to cool off, but you're actually cold. So when you undress, you're just getting colder, and it turns into this horrible cycle that just leads to your demise, unfortunately. And that is what's shown in these 5 people. Yes, there are some oddities, like Sabodin's skull fracture, like Krivonishenko having burns on his body, or having a piece of his knuckle in his mouth. But those could potentially be explained by the fact that they were so cold that they may not have realized they got so close to the fire. He may not have realized he was biting down that hard on his hand, because you lose your feelings. Can't really explain the fact that Krivonishenko's body was turned after his death. But we still also don't have the last 4 bodies. This would be remedied by May 5th of that same year, when a Mansi hunter would find the last 4 bodies. And Mansi is actually a local indigenous tribe to that area of Russia. And he had been out hunting and actually found what appeared to have been a snow den that had been covered in snow over the past few months. And as the snow melted, it became more apparent that someone had made this den. And knowing that there was still a search for these final 4 hikers, he informed the authorities, and they were able to send people out to start digging and seeing if potentially the final 4 had been in this den. And that is exactly what they would find. Now, here is where things really begin to take a turn, because the 4 that were found were also found to have been wearing some of the clothes of the 5 already found. For example, Thibaut Brignol was wearing Dubinini's fur coat and hat. Now, Dubinini was with them, but she was wearing a brown sweater that most likely belonged to Krivonishenko. And Zolotaryov, who was the sports instructor, was wearing Doroshenko's hat, and Kolevatov was wearing Doroshenko's overalls. So it appears that they have taken the other 5's clothing, possibly after they began the paradoxical undressing, or possibly before. We don't really know why they had their clothes, if they were given to them, if they found them after the fact and then just took them for the extra warmth. We don't know. And unfortunately, I'm not sure that we ever will. But in addition to this, some of the clothes, such as the sweater that Dubinina was wearing and the overalls that Kolevatov was wearing, were found to have radiation on them. And this alone sparked a lot of rumors of a potential cover-up by the military, because why would they have radiation on them? Was the military testing something and these hikers just happened to stumble upon it, which is why they have radiation on them? We don't really know. There's all this confusion, and it sparks this massive upheaval of what actually happened. But what was tried to have been explained is that 2 of the members of this hike were actually near a Soviet nuclear incident that had happened 2 years prior. One of the hikers lived in the area where it happened, and another one of the hikers actually helped to clean it up. So I believe that the examiner's belief is that because they had already been exposed to radiation, that just happened to come off on their clothes. It wasn't that they stumbled upon something during their hike, but just something that had been a part of them for the past few years. Now, in addition to this, these 4 were not believed to have died of hypothermia. In fact, their exact cause of death was listed as a compelling natural force. Many have compared it to that of what you would see from a car crash victim. So to start, the Beau Brignol was found to have a devastating skull fracture. In fact, it was so bad that pieces of his skull were said to have been found in his brain. Additionally, Dubinina and Zolotaryov were found to have crushed chests. And in addition to that, both of them were missing their eyes. Dubinina was even said to have been missing her tongue. I'm not 100% sure what kind of natural force would cause this to happen. Now, some people believe that it would be wild animal activity going for the soft tissue that can be eaten, which might explain things, except I reiterate the fact that they were found buried in snow. They weren't sitting out in the forest completely exposed. They were under feet of snow for months. I'm not sure what animal would have gotten to them. Additionally, Dubinina was found pressed up against a rock. And you'll actually see in this photo that I have here where we have an image showing exactly where each body was found. And you can see that Dubinina was found kind of on a little bit of a cliff she was found on her knees with her face pressed up against the side of the rock. Yes, her left side was slightly exposed, but most of her was pushed into her arms in the rock. And if that's the case, how would an animal have been able to get to both eyes as well as her tongue? Not easily. And if that's the case, why wouldn't it have gone for one of the more easy targets? Because there are 3 other people there. Yes, one of them was also missing their eyes, but there's still other people there. Why would you go after the one that's harder to get to? To me, it doesn't make full sense. But due to this and the radioactive clothes, there was a start to some logical and some extreme theories beginning to be tossed around. So we'll start with some of the more logical ones. My personal favorite is the slab avalanche theory. So a slab avalanche is different than a regular avalanche in the sense that a regular one is going to be on a very steep slope, and as it falls, it begins to build and build and build and gets bigger as it goes. But a slab avalanche is going to be on something not quite as steep, and it's basically just like a shelf of snow sliding forward. It doesn't really build or go a long way. It just kind of shifts. And the belief is that a slab avalanche occurred and either fell onto the tent or near the tent, causing a loud sound that would make the hikers panic, thinking that an actual, more recognizable avalanche was occurring. So they attempted to leave the tent quickly by cutting it open, running out, and going towards the tree line. And from there, due to their state of undress, it's possible that the states of hypothermia began, and that is what led to their deaths. It explains the cutting of the tent from the inside. It explains their rush out into the cold, into the woods. It could also explain how they somehow got separated into different groups. So you have the 5 that ended up by the wooded area, and then you have the 4 that ended up in the snow den, which was actually by ravine deeper into the woods. And so what's believed is that when they got separated, these 5 died of the hypothermia. These 4 tried to build a snow den because, again, they have the sports instructor with them, and each of them would have been very skilled in these long ski treks and mountainous adventures. So they know to build a den for cover as well as for warmth. But unfortunately, the belief is that then the den would not have been built correctly and collapsed on them, causing their severe injuries. Again, we don't fully get an explanation as to Slobodin's skull fracture or the missing eyes and tongue, but it is the most logical explanation. In fact, there were 2 Swedish researchers back in 2021 that would test this out through a mathematical equation. And they did write a paper in Communications, Earth and Environment, quote, saying, we do not claim that now we have a final explanation of what happened, but we added plausibility to the avalanche theory. And other avalanche experts would say it is unlikely, but it is the best explanation of all of those given. And quite frankly, I agree. However, there are others. One of, in my opinion, the more out there logical explanations is the lightning theory. There is a theory of either ball lightning or regular lightning happening, and this is proposed by Nigel Evans. So basically, the thought is that due to the tent slits and a tripod camera position having been set up outside of the tent, it's believed that they had been observing something in the sky. And there were actual reports from the Mansi people and other geographers in the area of glowing orbs in the sky, as well as there are photos showing aerial lights. And the theory elements that there was ball lightning near the tent, causing a loud static or loud noise, causing them to panic and flee the tent quickly, much as you see in the slab avalanche theory. And the first 2 deaths are actually stated to be from a lightning strike, which is why you see burns on Krivonashenko and why you see breakage in the branches in the tree above them. Additionally to this, something that is not stated into well later, which we'll get into that, but what is not stated into well later is that there were actually burn marks on the top of the trees in the area. So the belief is, well, if there's burn marks, maybe there's a lot of lightning, and that's what caused at least the first 2 deaths. And then the ravine injuries would have been caused by lightning hitting the ravine, which would have caused an explosion because you have this extreme heat hitting the extreme cold, causing a positive polarity event that would cause an explosion, causing all of them to get injured. And as for the clothes being on different people, it's believed that maybe Dyatlov just redistributed the clothes due to the deaths that happened earlier on. And this theory was actually favored by the lead investigator of the original incident, which was Lev Ivanov. Now, I'll say this. While my husband is not a meteorologist, those that know me, who know him, know that he is the weather guy in our area. He has been a storm chaser, a major meteorological, I'm having a stroke, major weather nerd for decades. And I actually discussed this specific theory with him, and he did say, 1, lightning in a snowstorm is rare. It's not unheard of, and it does happen, but it is rare. And 2, ball lightning alone is even more rare. So you're taking that and now adding it into a storm, into a snowstorm. And he says, it's not that it won't happen, but it definitely won't happen more than once, which is kind of what this theory implies at the beginning, is that there was a lot of ball lightning. And he said that is basically unheard of. It is possible that the regular lightning could have been happening if there was a massive snowstorm mixed with a massive thunderstorm causing this. It's possible, but it is highly unlikely, which is why it's not my favorite theory. which this then leads us into the next theory, which is the katabatic wind theory. And basically, this creates like a falling hurricane force wind that's caused by the cold, dense air descending rapidly. And it could have happened because what we believe is that the winds threatened to blow the tent away. So the group cut themselves out and covered the tent in snow to prevent it from blowing away. And then they rushed to shelter, whether that be in the woods or into the ravine. And this is backed up by the fact that the tent was buried when they found it. And additionally, there were wind patterns in the snow that are consistent with intense gusts. Additionally, in one of the diaries found from the students, it's mentioned that a jet engine like warm wind was felt before the night in which the incident occurred. And that would create a condition for this large wind theory to have happened. I'm not saying it did or didn't. It's not a theory that I think about much. There's so many theories. But it is possible. It is possible that this could have at least led them to have escaping the tent very quickly, because this wind theory does happen very quickly. The next theory is the infrasound theory. It was originally developed by Donnie Icker. Donnie Icker. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm so sorry. I am doing my best with these names. And this person had been on an extensive on-site research of this case for 5 years. They even retraced the trek themselves. And this theory basically states that due to the unique shape of the Ural Mountains being like a dome structure, the wind going over it could have caused something called a Kármán vortex street. And through this, it can create a terrifying and powerful sound that is proven to induce fear in humans. And specifically, in certain cases, it can cause something called infrasound, which is a very low hum. It's a very low frequency sound that we actually cannot pick up with our ears, but studies do show that it induces severe dread, panic, and irrational behavior. So this would have caused the hikers to flee the tent in terror without their warm clothing, and everything else falls in line as we've already discussed. And this theory was actually supported by NOAA scientists as a meteorological, I hate that word, as a meteorological possibility. We'll go with that. I think I'm pronouncing it right. I'm doing my best. So those are the logical theories that we're going to go with today. And then, of course, you have the out there theories. And it's one of the reasons that I actually love this case, because you're going to hear these and you're going to think, okay, yeah, those are out there. But there is some weight to some of these theories, okay? And we're going to discuss this. So the first couple, no weight to them. So you have some people saying it was a reindeer trample or an animal attack, such as a wolverine. If you don't know what a wolverine is, I didn't really know what it is. I would say that it looks like a snow version of a honey badger. I have a friend who's a vet who's probably going to yell at me for that comparison, but that's what it looks like. They're incredibly mean animals, and it's believed that, well, maybe they just attacked this group, causing them to panic and run. But this is a very weak theory due to the lack of external wounds that are consistent with large animal activity. Additionally, there is the Yeti, mink, or snowman theory. This is actually a theory that's based off of a photo that was found on one of the cameras from the group. It was the very last photo on one of them, which you can see here, as well as the Discovery Channel actually made a sensationalism type story about this called Russian Yeti, The Killer Lives, where it's basically just discussing how it is possible that a Yeti could have been involved in this attack. And yeah, there are man-sea legends of supernatural beings in the area, but it's all legend. There is no actual proof to this, as well as no actual proof that Yetis even exist. So that is, in my opinion, just the most out there, definitely didn't happen type theory. Now, we do get into some more logical, illogical theories, if you will. One being the accidental mushroom poisoning theory. And this is because of a mushroom in the area known as the agaric fly mushroom. And it was used by the Mansi people, but what they would do is they would hang them out on the trees to dry. Because if they were not dried, it would cause severe delusions, delirium, and death. And so it's believed that whether intentionally or intentionally, the group got a hold of these mushrooms, causing the severe delirium, leading to them escaping the tent and unfortunately passing. It is a plausible theory, actually, in my opinion. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that one specifically, but it's possible. Now we get into the crazy ones. I love these because, again, you're going to look at me and just say, that definitely couldn't be it. But there are so many things to say. Well, maybe. Like, for one, UFOs and aliens. And hear me out. Again, I say there were burn marks on the top of the trees. There are reports from the Mansi people and local geologists stating that there were orbs and flying lights in the sky that night. So here's the thing. The Soviet armed forces did actually come out later stating that they were testing rockets from their Baikonur, one of their military bases. But that this would have been done on the north side of the mountains, and this group would have been on the south side. So there shouldn't have been any notability of the rockets in the sky or burn marks in the trees, right? However, the investigator on the case, Ivanov, who I mentioned prior, did later claim in an interview that he did in the 90s that he was specifically told to remove any references of UFOs or other strange phenomena like the burn marks on the trees by A.P. Kirilenko, who was a member of the Soviet Congress, as well as his advisor, A.F. Ashtokin. If there's nothing to hide, why are you making them hide it? Those are the things that make me question. Like, I'm not saying it was UFOs, but I do think it's odd that the military got involved. I also think it's odd that the military is telling you to hide things on your record, on your reports. That doesn't make sense to me. So, was there something going on there? Was there UFO were there actual UFO occurrences in the area? And again, UFO doesn't necessarily mean alien. It's just an unidentified flying object. So it could have been military. It could have been anything. But I do think it's notable that the military told them not to mention it in their reports. And this also kind of leads us to our next theories, which is, first off, the KGB and CIA espionage. In this theory, it's that some or all of the hikers, I believe specifically the sports instructor, is believed to have been KGB, that they were on a mission and that they either saw something that they were not supposed to, or something went wrong, causing them to unfortunately pass away. And this theory is backed up by the fact that the eyes and the tongue are missing. Many people believe that specifically the last four were tortured, which is based off of the fact that they were missing their eyes. She was missing her tongue, basically as a way to say, you're not supposed to see this, you don't talk about this type message. It's kind of weak, but only due to the lack of real evidence. Additionally, the theory of them having been on a mission and it going wrong, that is based off of a theory that they were working with radioactive isotopes, and that something went wrong and it began to spread, causing their deaths, which is that theory is due to the fact that their skin was slightly discolored, leading to phosphorus colored skin, which would have come from the radioactive isotopes. But that is also not really a strong theory because it was only found on 2 of the people, not all of them. It's interesting. I will say that it is interesting. And because of this theory, there are actual investigators on this case today who are pushing for the exhuming of the bodies to be further tested for potential signs of torture. But it is notable to say that the families of those that passed do not want this. They want them to rest. They are tired of the questions. And quite frankly, they live in Russia. Maybe don't poke the bear. Just going to say. So it's a really heartbreaking scenario. But additionally to this, the last theory that I wanted to bring up, it is apparent that when the bodies were taken down to be examined, they were guarded not by police. They were guarded by the KGB. Barrels of alcohol were provided to the examiners, which was a primitive form of protection against radiation. They were, in fact, told to wipe down their entire bodies with the alcohol to protect them from the radiation. So it is believed that maybe there was more radiation found on the bodies than what was previously said, or they could have just been being overly precautious because why was there radiation found on some of these? Is there more? We don't know. Let's just go ahead and make sure that we're not going to be spreading any of it. So all of this to be said, my personal belief is that you're looking at a slab avalanche. Now, was that caused by the military actually doing the rocket testing that same night? Because if it was more towards the northern mountains than they're willing to admit, that could be the reason why they were trying to be secretive about the UFOs, which could have been the rockets, the burn marks on the top of the trees. The rockets could have caused loud noises, loud vibration, or strong vibrations that would have caused a slab avalanche leading towards these deaths. And that is my personal theory on this, is that military was involved, not necessarily in the way that we believe, but it caused the slab avalanche. Again, that is my personal theory. This is all alleged. But all of this leads me to the fact that there is no single theory that explains everything. Because even in my theory, it doesn't explain why one of the bodies was turned after it died. Why were their clothes mismatched, given out to different people? Why were some of them missing their eyes? Why was Dovanina missing her tongue? What caused those severe injuries? What made them leave the tent in the first place? There are so many questions. Most specifically, what was the role of the Soviet government in this Why were they asking them to hide things in their reports? It is truly the perfect storm of environment, mystery, and unfortunately, incomplete evidence. So, for you, what do you think is the strongest theory? Do you think it was a slab avalanche? Do you think it was military involvement? Do you think it was aliens or UFOs? Do you think maybe something else happened? There was a scuffle between the group themselves, causing them to split in such a way. Additionally to this, when do you think that enough is enough? This case is over 65 years old, but there are still family members of those that passed still alive. Yudin passed in 2013, and to the end of his life, he constantly questioned, what if? They were his friends. He was there right before it happened. The sisters and brothers of those that passed have said that they don't want the bodies exhumed. They don't want to keep asking questions. They're tired. They want their loved ones to rest in peace. So when does our curiosity, the fact that there doesn't seem to be a whodunit, if you will, in this scenario, so we're not looking for a murderer to put to justice. So when does our curiosity become too much? When do we need to stop asking questions and realize that in the overall situation, there is no one to put to justice? There is no conclusive evidence to say specifically this is what happened. This is when it happened. This is why it happened. So when do we need to put our questions at rest to let the family go to rest? That is all for today's episode of Crimes and Curiosities. I am super excited to hear from you on your thoughts of this specific case. Again, it is my Roman Empire. I love everything about this case. I love how in-depth it is, that every single piece of it has another piece, and then another piece, and then another piece. I will personally always be asking questions, but I'll be asking them to myself or to you. And feel free to ask your own questions down in the comments. I hope you have a great holiday season, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye.